So was Saturday's overtime win at Oklahoma State just a case of just another day in the Big 12? Let's talk about it. This is Locked On Baylor.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Baylor, brought to you by Jase Medical. Thank you for making it your first listen today and every day. I am your host, Cam Stewart. We are still talking about Baylor's thrilling, gutsy, kind of come from behind, although they led most of the second half, win in Stillwater. 9th straight win at Gallagher-Iber Arena for the Baylor Bears. They win it in overtime, 75-70 over the Cowboys. Awesome backdoor cover with Jalen Bridges dunking at the buzzer. And there are some negatives to take away from it. So I'm going to start with that. And get into the positives. It was not a great performance. And there were a few times now, while they led most of the second half, there were a few times down the stretch where they could have lost the game. And there was one in overtime, as a matter of fact, where I don't know what Oklahoma State was doing. They had a chance to hold for the last shot, and they tried to throw it to a cutter that wasn't cutting, and it just landed right in I think it was Jalen Bridges, I honestly don't remember, some Baylor Bears arms. They just threw the game away. So that's a young team at Oklahoma State. Contrary to a lot of the other teams in the league that are quite mature, that is one that is still building, and they haven't had a lot of their guys that had a lot of their rotation that they were hoping for play a lot of time together, if that makes sense. They've dealt with a couple of different injuries, so they haven't had the lineups out there at the same time that they've been hoping for, but they did on Saturday, and they put up one heck of a fight. And so is it a case of Baylor having a bad day, or is this what all the Big 12 road games are going to be like? Well, a little bit of both. In fact, here's what Scott Drew had to say after the game.
That's a Big 12 game. That's what they're like for all our new guys. I told them welcome to Big 12 because that's what you get each and every night. We saw it on film. Coach Boynton has done a great job with this team. If they didn't have injuries early, I know they'd be further along right now, but they're really playing well. And to do what he did, losing what they lost, is with quality young players, hats off to him. And I know they're going to have a real successful rest of the year. So as far as our team goes, we came in as the number one three-point shooting team in the country. I don't think we're leaving that way. We couldn't buy a bucket from three. Credit Oklahoma State for a really good defense. And then what happens is if you don't get on a roll, then even if you get a good look, it's hard to get going. So I credit them. But with our team, I think the biggest thing was the offensive glass, and really proud of how our guys were able to battle and compete when we're not making shots, because a lot of teams, if you get guys that are used to making shots and they miss shots, that starts to affect everything else they do, and credit our guys for not letting that happen. And then to have 7 turnovers on the road is a sign of a really good team as well. So that's all I got. We were blessed today.
Yeah, he makes some good points. Yeah, I think after sleeping on it for a night, setting aside what I said in the emotional post games that I do on these Saturdays, where I'm doing it right after the game. There's a reason for that. I want a more measured approach here on Monday's show. And I think that's right. In that it was just this is what the Big 12 is. And it was a day where everything that could have gone wrong shooting-wise for Baylor did. I mean, there's not going to be another game this season where they shoot 13% from three. At least I hope not. I don't think that's going to happen. You've seen it, how much they can fill up from three. They were the best team in the nation shooting the three-pointers going into Saturday's game. And they did say this on the broadcast a couple of times, which obviously was directly told to them in a coaches meeting. But Baylor has 4 or 5 guys who can hit 4 or 5 threes every night. Like that is true. It just all kind of and this happens with good shooting teams where everyone goes cold for a night. And that's what it was on Saturday. And yet they were still able to find a way and gut out a victory. Langston Love, who really saved them at points in that game, comes off the bench, 17 points, 6 of 11 from the field, to the point where I had some questions in the post-game show on Saturday whether he should start over Jaden Nunn. And I wouldn't hate it. I understand why Scott Drew, and I think most coaches would stick with Jaden Nunn, first off, to, get him some momentum under his belt, get him some confidence under his belt. And the way you're going to do that is keeping him in the starting lineup. He is still getting a feel for Big 12 basketball. I mean, this was his first Big 12 game, but the style that Baylor and the level that Baylor is playing at, coming in the transfer portal. And I also think they like having a guy who is a defensive stopper in the starting lineup, and having a guy who plays some pretty good defense, by the way, in Langston Love, who can also be a microwave off the bench. There is no great substitute for that, for guys who can come in and score right away off the bench. And Langston Love, his 17 points, led the Bears in bench points for the 9th time this season. So as up and down as his season has been, and, the downs are not bad, but, for each of these 17-point nights, which we've seen a couple of, 15, 17, 20s, he would have 3 or 5 points the next night. But it's that, again, that what he can bring you, that potential he can bring you off the bench, which he has proven time and time again. He could be a starter a lot of other places in this league, a lot of other places in the country. But right now he works really well as an Energizer bunny off the bench, who can fill it up, by the way. I mean, I don't mean it to sound like game manager for quarterback. He can score too. His 17 points is second on the team, only to RayJ Dennis. And one thing, speaking of RayJ Dennis a little bit, one thing that Scott Drew said in that answer too was 7 turnovers. They won the turnover battle, 7-10. And when you're facing a hyped up team that can get in your shirt, like Oklahoma State did on Saturday, on the road, game 1 of the conference schedule, and you only turn it over 7 times, that's big. That's big time. It especially with some of the turnover struggles they've had this year. I think it was 21 against Michigan State. To have a third of that in a conference road game, true road game. I know Michigan State was a true road game too. That is impressive. And that was one thing that I would have said coming into this game is something that could sink Baylor down the line. Could be a hole in the ship that could capsize the thing, is how sloppy they have been at times with the basketball. And that was not the case on Saturday. And they show that, hey, they can clamp it down. And when I look at those numbers, the poor 3-point shooting and the low turnovers, that tells me a lot. That tells me they are taking good shots. They are having good looks. Where there's some times where the ball gets in Jaden Nunn's hands or RayJ Dennis's hands and they're thinking shoot too much, sure. But they gave a lot of people a lot of good looks on Saturday, and some days they're not falling, and most teams in most environments will lose those games. Baylor did not. They went on the road and they won a conference game where most everything was going against them. So I've changed my tune a little bit. I'm not that worried about it. If they come out and put up a stinker on Tuesday against BYU, that's another thing, but I don't think they will. But we'll talk a little bit more about that BYU game coming up later in the show. Next, the ladies get another big, and I mean big and lopsided win, and now they head out on the road. We're going to hear from Nicki Collen coming up after this. But first, I got to tell you that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. As a matter of fact, we just wrapped up the NFL regular season yesterday. Playoffs coming up next week. How about them Cowboys and the other teams? We've got playoff football. We've obviously ramping it up into college basketball as well. There's still a ton of ways to get in on the action, and FanDuel Sportsbook is the #1 way to do that. And if just the time of the year isn't good enough for you, how about this? New customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app, it's so easy to use, so many different ways you can bet. They've got live same game parlays. You can find the bets in the Explore tab and see all that's going on in there. You can make a parlay in the parlay hub, so you're not just out there on your own making up your own parlays. You can see, boy, this is crazy enough to work just as well. And you can go find them through that. So it's a way to keep up with other bettors and see what they're going for. It really helps for dummies like me to have all these kinds of options. And so what I do is I go to FanDuel.com/locked on to make that first bet a layup. FanDuel.com/locked on. Terms and conditions do apply. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Switching it over to the women's side, they come away with a 30 some odd, I think it was exactly 30, maybe 29-point victory over Houston on Saturday at the Foster Pavilion. They are now 2-0 in that building. They will head out on the road, of course, undefeated on the season, and will likely be in the top 5 by the time you are listening to this on Monday. And they head out to Kansas and to Iowa State this week. Two teams that have been right near the top of the conference standings the last 2 years. Of course, Kansas was the kind of the darling story last year. Iowa State was that way the year before and kept up that momentum last year. So two tough road games coming off of a couple of lopsided home victories. So that's the beauty about this conference, not just on the men's side, but it's really becoming this way on the women's side too, of any given night, man. This is a good conference. And when you see, TCU entering into the rankings, West Virginia getting into the rankings, now they both got humbled by the top 2 teams in the league this week, but that doesn't mean they're not going to be hanging around there. And we know the coaching prowess they've got up at Iowa State and what Kansas was able to do last year. These are teams that can, at Kansas State, got a ranked team. So they've got some good top to bottom women's basketball in this conference. And it is, no nights off. We say that for the men all the time, but it's going to be that way for the women too. And Nicki Collen was talking about on Saturday, she didn't love her team's defense in the first half. Now they gave up 33 points, but they had scored 48. And it talked about how that can kind of confuse things a little bit for teams when they think, well, if I'm getting 3 and they're getting 2, we're going to win. But instead of just clamping down and playing defense, and then they turn things around. So she's not going to expect anything less than the ultimate effort out there, which again is just, it's to some degree it is coach talk, but you just love hearing it. I think part of it is because we don't hear that a lot in football, but I'm not going to go too much into that. Anyway, now they set out on the road. They've won their first 3 Big 12 games. The first one was in Austin, 2 a little home cooking, and now they got back-to-back out on the road. And Nicki Collen talked about that as well as the teams they're playing after the game on Saturday and what Bears fans can expect going in to those 2 contests.
It's part of the game. You protect home court and you go steal them on the road. And I think we're good enough to go win on the road. And so Kansas 0-3 to start the season. Really, really surprised by that. Think they're a really talented veteran roster, a little slim. But I think they have the ability. They're a little, to me, like TCU was coming in here, where they're good at all 5 positions. They're veteran. They have a freshman of the year candidate that's their 5th starter. And then I think Iowa State's the youth movement. They had a lot of transfers out, but I think they're really starting to come together. Emily Ryan's getting healthy, and that's a really tough place to play. So really good challenge for this team to continue to play well and find ways to win and play good team basketball.
So yeah, she's not taking anybody lightly. She can't, first off, because the teams are good, and second off, from what she said last week with the don't poke the bear, you respect your opponent. And we'll see how the ladies do with that, with those 2 games. I do expect them to be 2 Baylor victories, and if I'm being honest, they're probably comfortable victories, but Nicki Collen and the coaching staff are not expecting that. every night. In fact, she said it earlier in the press conference. I didn't include the answer in here, but she said, I watched Houston and I thought, we matched up fairly well, but I didn't expect us to win by 30. I never expect us to win a game by 30. And for those of us that have followed the Lady Bears for years and years and years, it has been pretty reasonable, even in conference games, to expect to win games by 25, 30, 40 points. Like there is that big a discrepancy in the sport, unfortunately. And fortunately, Baylor has been that good. But they are not treating it like that. And like I just said before the soundbite, it's not your slightly older brother's Big 12 in terms of, there's just, back in the day, 8 of the 10 teams you could just roll over. That's not the case anymore. And certainly the coaching staff thinks that as well. And one thing Nicki Collen did also talk about is just the cohesiveness of this team. And she brings up good points in this answer that I'm going to play in a minute here, but basically saying that, we've had some ultra talented teams here in the past, but this team isn't that, in that they don't have, a top 5 WNBA draft pick or anything like that. They don't have that, 5-star top 5 recruit, right? But they are greater than the sum of their parts. And what the brilliant part is about this team is that they understand that. And this is kind of a lengthy answer, but I think it's really good. She gives some great examples and explains what she means by this. But here's what Nicki had to say about the cohesiveness of her team and how that's advantageous for them going forward.
I think they know, they're all really good individually, but they're all so much better collectively, and I think when you embrace that idea of, we have really, really talented players in our program, but maybe we don't have the number 2 pick in the WNBA draft this year. But, it was hard to guard lists, but most people knew who I was going to go to in those situations. Now we play to the best matchup. We play to the hot player. We play, and, it means you have to be unselfish at times. There's no doubt that Sarah took a lot more shots last year. But right now, Sarah's being more efficient than she's ever been in her career, and she's just getting better and better at that. As quite frankly, I think she gets healthier and healthier coming off a long off season where she wasn't. But I think it starts with her. It starts with her and Asia and Dre. And Dre's played in an NCAA tournament. Sarah doesn't know anything but the NCAA tournament, but Asia's never played in an NCAA tournament. Like, as good as she was at Missouri, as many individual accolades as she has, she wants to win. She wants that experience. Yaya didn't make an NCAA tournament. And so, we've got some kids that are, I think, truly enjoying winning and, whatever that means. And it doesn't mean that they're 100% happy, that they don't score a few more points or don't get a few more rebounds, but I think they recognize that it can always be their turn the next time.
Which is just great to hear. It's really cool to hear. And you see it too, right? You see the buy-in from these players and you hear it from them in the post-game pressers as well. We talked about Bella Fauntleroy last week saying, sometimes you, sometimes me, always we. That's something they preach out there and they echo it, and they are so happy for all of their teammates, and you just don't know who it's going to be night in, night out. In fact, the night that Bella Fauntleroy said that, Dre Edwards only had 2 points, and she has an awesome game on Saturday. So do a couple other of the Bears, and you could just see the team basketball out there every night. And Baylor in the past, not that they haven't done that, but they didn't always have to do that. You could go to Nelissa Smith or Kalani Brown or Lauren Cox or Nina Davis and just feed them all night, give them 35 or 40 and win the game with one player. Not the case anymore. And they really have bought in clearly early in the season. And I would dare to say, even going back to last year, they bought in, and you see how much it positively affects the players, even like a Sarah Andrews, who's one of the best players in the nation this year. But Nicki said in that, the numbers might not be as good, just counting stats, but her efficiency is way better. And that's what helps the team. And that's why I think you're going to see this team go pretty far. We had a couple of great performances from the Lady Bears this week, but will it be enough to get one of them the Baylor Athlete of the Week, which is going to be my new segment for Monday shows? We'll see. But first, we've got another message before we get to Baylor's Athlete of the Week. I know we come to sports and to this podcast to escape some of the crazy realities of real life. But can we just talk for a minute about being prepared for real life? Can we just do that for a second? Because according to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. And that is scary. I can't imagine a more hopeless feeling than if one of my loved ones got sick while a supply chain issue kept them from the life-saving medication they needed. Thankfully, we're going to be okay because of Jase Medical. The Jase case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sinusitis, skin infections, among others. This stuff could happen to any one of us. So visit jasemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It has never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to jasemedical.com and use offer code locked on to get $20 off your first order. That's Jase, rhyming with case, Jase, medical.com, and use the offer code locked on for $20 off that first order. Closing things out on a Monday. And I'm starting it with kind of a new segment here. I record these on Sundays. I know that's crazy, but I record the Mondays shows on Sundays, and it not only gives me a chance to breathe coming off of a Saturday basketball game or football game, but it also kind of gives me a chance to look back on the week. And so what I'm going to start doing is a little Baylor Athlete of the Week segment and give this one person their flowers. Usually I'm giving the team their flowers, but I do like to do it to individual players as well. And this was a tough one this week because I don't know that this person was the hero in either of the games he or she played this week, but was pretty darn solid in both. And the growth of this player in a short time has been so impressive. And the person I'm giving it to this week is one of my favorite players, to be totally honest with you. You hear me talk about this player a lot, and that is freshman sensation Eve Meese. Eve Meese is getting the Athlete of the Week, and that is through 2 games, one at the first one at the Foster, and then Saturday against Oklahoma State. He has a pretty darn good 2 games. He combines for 29 in those games. He scores the first basket ever at the Foster Pavilion. So shout out to Eve Meese for being the answer to that trivia question years down the line. And he has a great game against Cornell, which had some physical bigs. He goes perfect from the floor, 8 for 8, career high 16 points, a double-double in both games. He has 13 and 10 against Oklahoma State. And I did give him some flowers in the post-game show on Saturday, because I thought he was doing great things without the basketball. If you're a soccer fan, you'll know that runs are really important. Even if a striker isn't touching the ball, but they're running through the middle and going full pace, they're bringing defenders with them and they're bringing attention with them. And that can often lead to attention going away from where the ball actually is. And that's what Eve Meese does a lot in the paint, where he's got guys driving. It may seem simple, but instead of kind of walling off guys, he's kind of running around in the paint. And he's a dunker. So, guys have to go with him. They have to respect him. How many times is RayJ Dennis going to drive down the lane instead of going for a layup, going to lay it up for an alley-oop? So you have to respect him. And he has really found a great innate understanding of that and the offense. And it helped them a lot on Saturday for a day where threes weren't falling. It was helping big time get some twos, some easy twos, as a matter of fact. And they are going to need him big time. They always need him, right? I think he's one of the most important players on the team. But looking at the BYU matchup tomorrow, which we're going to have a crossover and preview that game in depth for tomorrow's show to get you ready before the Tuesday night tip-off. That team can rebound, BYU, and they can really shoot. They and Baylor were the 2 3-point shooting just behemoths of this conference, and still are going into this game. But where BYU has an advantage over a lot of teams is on the boards. Now, looking at Big 12 rankings, overall rebounds per game, BYU number 1, Baylor 14th, which is last in the conference. Offensive rebounds, BYU 4th, Baylor 7th. So they move up quite a bit in that one. But then we go to defensive rebounds. BYU is 1st. Baylor is 14th again. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Now, this will show you how good an offensive team Baylor is. Opponents' rebounds. BYU only 4th in the conference. Baylor 1st, meaning they give up the least amount of rebounds to their opponent. That's a scary number, to be 14th in overall rebounding, but 1st in opponents rebounding. That means this team doesn't miss a lot. They take some good shots. And Scott Drew talked about it earlier in the show, and I didn't really address it in his answer, but that was the offensive rebounding was one of the big reasons they were able to win that game on Saturday against Oklahoma State, and why they won that game was they missed a lot of threes, yeah, but they got a good amount of second chances. And that's something Baylor has been, great at for years, but especially that 1920 season and beyond, when they made that turn to an elite basketball program, is offensive rebounding. And it's something they didn't have a lot of last year. Jalen Bridges got better at it as the season went on, but Flo Thamba just didn't give you much of anything in the rebounding department on either end. And they do have that this year, and Yves Missi is a big reason why. He's not the only reason why, but he's the big reason why. Great rebounder and a guy who, again, draws a lot of attention on the boards. And you see that when a guard pulls down an offensive rebound, it's probably because a couple of guys are trying to body up Yves Missi, and he gets all of their attention. So Yves Missi, player of the week. Looking ahead, Baylor got that ranked matchup on Tuesday against BYU. We're going to have a full breakdown of that tomorrow. How do you think the Bears are going to stack up? How do you think the Lady Bears are going to do in these 2 road tests coming up for Nicki Collen's ladies? Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Any comment helps out the algorithm, so we really appreciate it. Be sure to like and subscribe. That helps out a ton. And be sure to follow along with making it your first listen today and every day. We're the only place that is giving you 5 days a week, nothing but strictly Baylor athletics content that isn't coming straight from the university. And we're proud of that. Anyway, we'll have more tomorrow breaking down BYU and the surprise Cougars, who are still going to be in the rankings as you're listening, even though coming off a loss to Cincinnati, and what kind of danger they could provide for the Baylor Bears Tuesday night at the Foster Pavilion. We'll see you then. This is Locked On Baylor.